This is a video for the handout that was given out on Tuesday for the polar quiz that you're taking on Friday. So I just want to go over some of these questions. This is very much like what the quiz will be like, nothing harder than this. So first of all, you were asked to, in these problems, to graph these points. And the first idea is to find out the spoke. So in problem A, it's the spoke that's 7 pi over 6, which I highlighted there. And then you're going to count out 3 radius. And we count out to 3, which is right here, and we put a dot, and we label it as point A. For the next one, we find the radius that is 5 pi over 4, which I have here outlined in green. But you'll notice that it says -2, which means that you're going to back up. So while this is the direction in which you're staring, you're going to back up back here. So you're going to be staring towards 5 pi over 4, but backing up 2 units. And so there's point B. For this next one, you're not backing up at all. It's a positive radius of 2. So we find this spoke that's -7 pi over 3. And remember what that means is we would have gone all the way around this from 0 radians to negative pi over 2. We would have here negative pi, come all the way around to -2 pi, and -7 pi over 3 is another pi over 3. So that's -7 pi over 3. And you're going to count out 2 radius, and we go out to 2 radius, we get point C. So that's just graphing some polar points. For these problems here, you're going to be converting from polar to rectangular in these 2 problems, and then over here you're going to be converting from rectangular to polar. So first of all, with the polar points, we recognize that we have the radius and we have an angle, and we have the we want to change that to x's and y's, and we have this formula that we've learned about, that x is equal to r cos theta and y is equal to r sine theta. Given that our r is 6, we plug that in, and our theta is -2 pi over 3. So at this point, it's a matter, because there's no calculator, you've got to remember where is -2 pi over 3 and what is the cosine of that. So I made a real quick sketch of a unit circle and found my -2 pi over 3, which is down here in quadrant 3. And I even am thinking about my x and y axes, and that my x-axis is my cosine axis and my y-axis is my sine axis. And so to get to this point that's at -2 pi over 3, I would be going in the x direction -1/2, and in the y direction -√3 over 2. So that's my cosine and my sine. And so I'm just going to replace each of those. Multiplying those out, I've got my rectangular coordinate of x and y. Doing the same thing with problem number 3 and plugging in for the radius and the angle. You might again have to look at a unit circle, but you need to have those things memorized. That's something we've been doing all year, ever since we started trig. And we get that the answer here for the rectangular coordinates is √2. For going from rectangular to polar, I want you to remember that in polar we have many different ways we can talk about the same point. And so you have to do one with a positive r and give me another point that has a negative r, meaning where you're going to be backing up, and how you would discuss that. So first of all, to find the r, we take the square root of the sum of the squares of the x and the y, as you can see what we have in the formula here, and we get 6√2. To find the theta, there's 2 different methods you can do this, and one is using a graphic approach and reasoning, and the other is plugging it into a trig formula. So I'm going to just first of all look at the graphic reasoning approach, and what that means is I'm going to take these points, -6, -6, and graph them in a rectangular coordinate system, and I get the point right here at -6, -6. And if I draw a ray, or like a vector, or to that point, I can see that the theta, the angle, would be the rotation to that ray. And hopefully you can see from that graphic approach that that's going to be the angle of 5 pi over 4. Now, again, the trig approach would be, we have the formula that theta prime, meaning the reference angle, is going to be the arctangent of y over x. And remember that it's in quadrant 3, so our theta prime, we'd be adding, we don't say degrees in this unit, we're going to be talking about radians, so you're going to add pi to whatever your theta prime is. And with tangent of -6 over -6, that's arctangent, of 1, we think of what angles has a ratio of 1, and that's pi over 4. So this is going to be pi over 4 plus pi, and that's going to give us 5 pi over 4. I particularly like the graphic approach because we're only going to be dealing, without a calculator, only dealing with things that are in angles that we know of from the unit circle. So graphing it kind of should give you an idea of, is it going to be, a perfect diagonal that's going to be something over 4, or is it going to be, the over a 6 or over a 3. So we have our radius and our angle. But the big question is, if you had the negative r, which is implying that we're going to be backing up. So again, I'm going to use this graphic picture. I think this is what's helpful, is the graph. And we see that if I was going to be backing up, I would be going back here. So that means I'm going to stare at the opposite side there. I'm going to be staring at pi over 4 and backing up 6 root 2, and that will get me to the same location. So I'm going to do that with the next problem, the same approach. I'm going to use a graphic approach. And I've got first of all, my radius, so square them both and add and take the square root. And then I'm going to graph that point 3 root 3. And so I just guessed it. I just kind of said, well, that's about here. I know 3 root 3 is more than 3, so I went out a distance and then down 3, which is not as far. And I can get the idea that in a unit circle, this is the angle that's going to be over 6. Since it's in the 4th quadrant, it's going to be 11 pi over 6. And I also want to think about its opposite angle because I'm going to be talking about that negative radius. So opposite of 11 pi over 6 is 5 pi over 6. So now I have both the angle and I have the opposite angle. And I have the radius was 6, and when I'm going to use the negative radius, I'm going to be using the opposite angle. Okay. For the last problem on this review sheet, it was graphing by hand, and you have first of all this chart. And then we've got the polar grid that we're going to use here. So the idea here is to, one, complete the chart with all the things you know. You're not going to have a calculator, so you need to be able to fill this out without a calculator. And then we're going to plot the points, and we're going to be looking at it in the terms of these angles are the spokes that we see down here. And then we will have in this bottom row, we will have each radius on each spoke. And remember that you've got to connect as you go. If you don't, you're going to end up with a bunch of dots in this grid, and you're not going to know where, actually this coordinate plane, it's not a grid, but this coordinate plane, this polar coordinate plane, and you're not going to know what to connect to what. So you make sure you connect as you go. So first of all, we take the cosine of all of those angles that are given in the chart, and we do that. And then we double each one of those because it says 2 times cosine of theta. So in blue, I doubled each one of those. In this third row, we're doing 1 minus the blue numbers. So I'm taking 1 minus 2, and I get negative 1. And then 1 minus root 3, well, that's just 1 minus root 3. I don't know what that is right now. In this last row, I need to find the decimal number for each one of these. And I'm going to give you, like I will on the quiz, some information. I know what the square root of 3 is because it's written here, 1.73. So I'm going to have 1 minus 1.73, which is going to give me negative 0.73. And you're going to fill out the rest of the chart that way. And now for the graphing, we don't need this row in black. We don't need the row in blue, and we don't need the row in green. We only need to know the spokes and this decimal for the radius. So I'm just going to look at those, and remember we're saying those are the spokes and those are the radius in decimal form. So we're going to be plotting those down here in the coordinate plane, but notice that I have a spoke right there that is the pi over 12, and pi over 12 is not in this chart. Neither are these other 3 spokes, 5 pi over 12, 7 pi over 12, and 11 pi over 12. And this chart is only going to pi. So that's important, that we're only using those spokes. So the first spoke is the 0 spoke. And we're looking at this 0 spoke, but it says to go negative 1 on the 0 spoke, which means to back up to negative 1. So we put a point right there at negative 1 where we backed up while staring at the 0 spoke. The next one is to stare at the spoke that's pi over 6. That's what this says in the chart. Stare at this spoke, but back up 0.73. So we backed up. I'm going to show you that once again. This was staring at pi over 6. We're standing right here at the origin. And staring at that, we back up 0.73. And I just eyeballed where that was. And so when I put that point, I connected it with the first one. As you connect, you should be connecting in nice, gentle curves. These are polar grid graphs, and everything's going to have a nice little curviness to it. Not straight lines, but curves. The next problem, actually the next spoke on the chart is pi over 4. So I'm staring at pi over 4, standing at the middle, but it says negative 0.41. So we're going to back up 0.41, and I connected that. The next spoke is pi over 3, but it says 0 in the chart, so we go stay right to the origin, so we connected that. The next spoke is pi over 2, and it says at pi over 2, it says to go all the way up to 1. Now, it's not going to be straight up to 1. It's not going to be straight up. We're doing a curve, so it's curved through the origin, and then it's going to go over here. So watch carefully and see how it has this little bit of kind of loop right there, just I curved it, so I'm kind of following a nice gentle curve to 1. Then the next spoke is 2 pi over 3, and it says to go out to 2, so I put a dot at 2. The next spoke is 3 pi over 4, and it says to go to 2.41, so we go to 2.41. The next one is the spoke 5 pi over 6, and at 5 pi over 6 we go to 2.73, which is approximately there. Remembering now, it does not have this spoke here, which would be 11 pi over 12, is not in the chart. The next spoke in the chart is the pi spoke. So I've looking at that one, and we're going to put a point at 3. And I did, and that's the end of our chart. So that's all you're supposed to graph, nothing more than that. And that's the end of this handout that is a review for the quiz that you'll be taking on Friday.